Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about why so many people are unhappy and what we can do about it.
Yeah, we're going to look at the sources of unhappiness, and we're going to look at ways that you can combat the things that are making you unhappy and give you true joy in your life.
With man's search for meaning, man truly searches for happiness. Let's figure out why.
All right, grateful to be back in the studio with you guys again. Father Rich, Ryan, good to see you guys. We have Paul George here. Really excited to have you on the show, Paul. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here.
Paul is the executive director for Art of Living, which is a quote from a Pope Benedict document. Very beautiful. The Art of Living helps people find happiness in marriages, organizations, parishes. It's just a really beautiful ministry. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today, but it just bellies into our topic, which is how to find happiness in this world today, which is important. I'm excited to talk about it.
And that's why, Paul comes to us with a great charism that God has given him in the church. And we're very, very happy to have you here, brother. He goes around all over the place spreading the good news of happiness. And he has this beautiful book, Rethink Happiness. So make sure you check out our social media pages because we're going to have those on there. And clearly, my brothers and sisters, we want you to visit us on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and be sure to connect with us on the web at www.catholictalkshow.com. There you'll be able to see every way that you can listen in or view our content. And if you do want to view our content, be sure to go to YouTube, type in Catholic Talk Show, and make sure that you click the subscribe button. And right next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell. If you click that bell, you'll get everything that we produce from top down, left, right for our specialized content. It'll be there for you. And my brothers and sisters, a big shout out and a big sense of gratitude from us to our patrons. If you want to be a patron of ours and support our show financially to ensure the success of the show and reaching new markets, go to patreon.com/Catholic Talk Show. There you'll see many tiers of how you can support us financially to ensure that content like this can get out to as many people as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. That made me happy.
That made me happy, too.
See, a little contribution into each other's life, I think, but in
You're
all
a ray of
seriousness.
sunshine in my life.
And I feel the same way about you, Sheil. I really do.
A lot of people comment on our show and they love watching it because of the joy that we all share together. And, it's out of friendship and in our faith and sharing our faith and doing it in this way. I think it's very authentic and explicit that we experience joy around each other.
It's also very intentional. There's, people send us messages. Why aren't you covering this controversy? And why aren't you talking about this? And why aren't you harder on this liberal? And why aren't you doing this or that? And it's like, we don't want to do that. There's so much division, so much unhappiness. And the church needs to be a source of joy in the world. And I don't want to go to my judgment and have the Lord say to me, why did you cause more division? I mean, there is enough unhappiness in this world to go around without us contributing to it.
And there's enough joy to share with the world and our faith. And that's why we're glad to have you on to talk about this. I think, examining what, I think before we even examine happiness, I think we have to examine why people are
unhappy.
And, there's a lot to it. I mean, there's the medical side of things. There's, the abandonment that people have experienced in their life from people. There's
the isolation. And I think we're drawing closer to the sense of what is our unhappiness by way of what we express in our joy. Our friendship is a great joy to me, and our communion and fellowship with all the saints in heaven and the fellowship that we experience in the Catholic Church, coming together and celebrating the divine mysteries, brings me great joy as a priest. But just as a Catholic, just as a follower of Christ, it's our togetherness that we're walking together is a source of great joy. But I think the isolation and people feeling alone and feeling depressed and by themselves and nobody understands my suffering, that's a very dark place of unhappiness.
Yeah, so many people who listen to our show have expressed that they have a lot of loneliness in their lives, and that listening to us allows them to at least feel for a few minutes that they're part of something, they're in a conversation. And, that's That's what we want to do. I mean, we want to be there for people. We want to spread joy. I mean, that's our purpose here.
And we are so happy that you are a part of our community with the Catholic Talk Show. And we've been developing these bonds through social media ties. It's pretty awesome. And especially to Paul. I mean, Paul, it's great to have you on the show, to get to know you and to share your gifts with our viewers and our listeners. So this book, Rethink Happiness, Dare to Embrace God and Experience True Joy. What was the inspiration behind this? And you know, what's your thought
Where's
process?
that title come from?
Yeah.
Well, I think the inspiration was my own quest for happiness, right? And I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah.
Anyone who's listening can relate to the fact that if you ask someone a question, do you want to be happy? No one would say no, because it's a desire in our heart. God created us for happiness. And then people say, well, why didn't you call it Rethink Joy? Like you should. Happiness and joy interchangeable. Like, let's not get stuck on semantics, right? Like, we all desire happiness and joy in our life. To get to your question, how was it inspired other than my own search and quest? Pope Benedict. You know, a lot of people say, you know, happiness is sort of this new agey term. I mean, read back to the saints and popes. They talked about happiness. Go back all the way to Augustine. He talks about happiness, finding happiness. But if there's no end to the means, if there's no source of your happiness, it's incomplete. Right.
Yeah. It's kind of patchy.
Yeah. It just falls apart.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, and you told me a really cool, again, tying to Pope Benedict XVI, where the title of your book came from, Rethink Happiness. You want to explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the word rethink, Pope Benedict was writing when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. He wrote a document and said the word conversion, metanoia, which we've all heard, means conversion. It says when it's translated back into the English, it means to rethink. So the word conversion meaning to rethink. And that really kind of hit me, like all the questions that I'm asking in here is my rethinking. It's my process of conversion. Everyone out there is thinking about something. Am I happy? What's my purpose? What am I supposed to do with my life? Why am I lonely? You know, why am I miserable? You know, they're asking these questions. And when you're rethinking your life and you begin to rethink it through the lenses of God's plan for your life, that's where conversion begins to take place. I think people are having conversions even though they're not thinking about God, because they're thinking about life. They're rethinking, I'm not happy. Where do I find it? And that's what you're saying. We can try to find happiness in so many different places, and open a lot of those places are dead ends.
Yeah. What about like when in your research and how you've built this and your own experience, like, you know, the source of unhappiness, sometimes we don't really recognize in our lives. I think that one thing that I see is that people don't know why they're unhappy, you know, and some people are able to rethink things clearly. Maybe it's through the grace of God, maybe it's just through their own sort of mental capacity, but you know, what are you, how do you like look at people who are unhappy and say you're confused?
Before you respond to that, just pastorally speaking, I hear that over and over again, men and women of all different ages coming to me and they're expressing that they're depressed. They're expressing that they're unhappy, but they can't figure out why.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of techniques of how I approach it, but interesting to find out from your perspective, and your charism is clearly driven into this space, and would love for you to shed light on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about loneliness. And when I was studying the book, there was a study that said that grown men will die more from loneliness than they will from heart disease or obesity.
How does that manifest itself in the passing away?
It's just like this idea of like
destroys their bodies. It exhibits itself
just this lack of
psychosomatically.
community and joy and interaction. You know, I work with couples all the time. They say, I had no idea when I got married I would still be lonely.
Yeah.
You know, so this quest for happiness, one of the things I talk about is this idea of destination happiness. Fulton Sheen talked a little bit about it, and who's going to be a saint, I believe we just kind of heard about. This idea that when I reach a certain point, achieve a certain thing, get a certain thing, then I will be happy. This idea, I arrive here and then that will be happiness. I get married, I enter my vocation. And yet happiness is such an internal quest.
I call that the God-sized hole. Everybody in their very being has a hole the size of God. And there's nothing in the universe and there's nothing in existence or reality bigger than God. And nothing smaller than God can ever fill that hole. And you can continue to throw stuff into it. Marriage, sex, drugs, success, things, accomplishments, travels. And that hole is the size of a black hole, and only God can fill it up. Until God fits that hole, you are always going to be putting more into it and never being filled
And
up.
you might stabilize your joy through some of these false items, right?
Or numb it.
You're numbing that.
Numb it. And
You're
then,
feeding your addiction, your
but eventually it's
concupiscence.
it counters later, and the reaction is even more deeply.
We've all experienced that. You have a great night out, or you go on a good trip, or you make a good business deal, and you're like, man, this is so
Feels
good.
great.
The adrenaline.
Yeah.
And then you lay in bed at night a week later, and you're like, I'm still the same person. You know, I'm back at the same place.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that you describe these states of life that you're working toward. You're progressing in life. You're accomplishing these things. Your satisfaction, your happiness is not rooted in the accomplishment. And it reminds me of you because you described, you got to the day of your wedding day, and there's so much suffering that goes up to that, and so much investment of time and energy and resources and decoration and all this other stuff. And then it passes, right? And then what happens now? What happens the morning after and the weeks to come? For my ordination, everything leading up to that place and laying down, nose hitting the marble and offering my life to Christ, a whole nother degree of suffering entered into my life.
Right.
And then progressing through that, going on for, further studies, the bishop asked me to continue. And then that was a different form of suffering. Then coming back to the diocese, entering into multiple assignments, different stuff. Now as a new baby pastor, I mean, the suffering that I'm experiencing now, it's like you think in your mind, I'm going to become a pastor and I'm going to be happy.
Right.
Then this flood of suffering comes in. And where do we find the stabilizing force
right.
of our happiness and our joy? It has to be rooted in the crucified Christ. In my opinions, that's where I find my stability. And to the point that you were making, Sheil, St. Augustine says so beautifully, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. Resting in the suffering that I'm currently facing, not trying to escape it, not trying to numb it, but embracing it with Christ gives me a sense of I'm not alone in my darkness.
Absolutely.
I'm not alone in my suffering.
And this is for us as Catholics, as Christians, when we talk about conversion, ultimately we talk about that it leads, the epicenter of that is a relationship with Christ. I mean, without that, there is no conversion. There is nothing that stabilizes us. There's nothing that gives us a foundation to live on. Everything else falls apart. We'll lose our titles. When you die, you won't be pastor anymore. I won't be married anymore. Everything's going to fade away. And then you kind of lay and realize, then what's life about?
Yeah, Pope Francis said a moving truck doesn't follow the hearse. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
You don't take it with you.
No, you don't, actually.
Yeah, another interesting thing, too, there's an ebb and flow of this because I think we're all made up of, who we are psychologically, obviously, in light of God's creation, the gifts and talents that he gives us, circumstances that we're in, like you were mentioning, and then the ebb and flow of your life and the redirection and rethinking. I think for myself, I had a conversion, went to the seminary, had suffering, but like there's seasons almost of my soul where when I got married and we started having kids, I was not able to connect to God in prayer the way that brought me all this joy before. Mm-hmm. And so I went through this, period of unhappiness because I was not able to do the things that I wanted to do to have this relationship with God. And so this spiritual director told me, he's like, you're in a different time of your life. You need to take up different practices. You need to, do X, Y, and Z. And so it kind of gave me this awareness where, again, I'm having a conversion again, because I'm having conversions within circumstances
Absolutely.
of my life.
Yeah.
You know what that reminds me of is I know we have a great devotion to Conchita Cabrera, and the Seasons of the Soul that she wrote, that little book. I mean, she's written more than probably St. Thomas Aquinas, brilliant woman up for the cause of canonization as well. But the Seasons of the Soul, it's so true.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people in unhappiness, they tend to not be aware of these particular things, like myself, right? Like I'm not speaking from a knowledge and understanding. I'm speaking from like, this happened to me. I had to rethink how I was going to be happy, even though I knew that Christ was the only way I was going to be happy, I still was unhappy.
But it was like, where is Christ in the midst of this,
right?
You know,
and
suffering and season of my life?
Yeah.
Where is he? And, you know, rethinking without introduction of Jesus is just rethinking. And that's why we look into the world and there's so much, you know, like people think whatever they want and then they just find whatever answer that they want.
Yeah.
We have the source of truth and the answer in Christ. Like that's our job in the church, is to introduce people to the source of happiness.
Yeah.
Without that, then people just keep rethinking. They develop their own, you know, psychology and philosophies, and you know, it's just, you know, you
some of it helps. Like some of the stuff like psychology has brought in has helped you become more aware of yourself and more aware of presenting yourself to God in prayer. And, you know, some of it's kind of crazy. And then you look at pills, you know, like how many people are on antidepressant drugs? It is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
And for a lot of people, it's
for
incredibly necessary.
I would say the great majority of people on these medications are not receiving that full, they're getting numbed to something that they can utilize to suffer in Christ and grow in a relationship with him.
Anxiety is on a huge rise. I think it's a 50% rise since 2004. And look, it's a human element. We all struggle with some type of stress and anxiety. So if you're sitting there watching, you listen, and you're like, oh, it's just me. I think that's the biggest lie. It's just me.
Yeah.
We all desire happiness. We all struggle in that. We're all sinners. We're all broken. We all struggle with stress and anxiety and worrying about bills and where we're going to go and family and kids and the whole deal. We're all in this together. Yet at the center of that is Jesus wants to walk with us through it. As Father, you mentioned the suffering Christ, the one who walks with us. And this is what's beautiful about our theology, is that conversion isn't a one-time moment. It's not a one-day thing. It's not just an aha moment, although you can have those things. Conversion is literally every day. Yeah. It's in every season, rethinking, Lord, what am I doing? Where am I? Where are you? This is what draws us into that relationship with Christ.
Yeah, and it's a difficult relationship. Marriage is a difficult relationship. The priesthood is a difficult relationship. It presents its problems constantly.
If it was easy, everyone would do it.
Well, it's because
there wouldn't be a 50% divorce rate. There wouldn't be, you know,
Here's where I'm going with it, though. Our culture is like, you can have everything right now. Flip open your app, watch the movies. You can have food delivered to your door.
Everything at your fingertips.
Amazon, right? Like neighbors now don't even talk to anybody because there's no square for them to go for certain
The loss
items.
of community is such a
Then you
tragedy.
look at people, I don't even use Facebook anymore because it's like somebody's either bragging about themselves because they obviously don't have this deep understanding of peace and joy in their lives, where they're trying to get it from other people in this form. And then you got people who are just angry, who just want to lash out at other people. And then you've got this society of media, this 24-hour news cycle where we got to find someone we got to blame and take everything that they've earned away from them and not forgive them.
And unfortunately, we don't have Ron Burgundy on television every single day, because that would make things a little bit better. But no, I think social media, what you're bringing up is a great point to unhappiness. I think there's a great correlation to that. And I don't think there has ever been a forum in the history of the world that cultivates the spirit of coveting more effectively than social media.
Absolutely.
Because
100%.
as you're scrolling for some type of stimulation that communicates, I'm happy, I'm okay, I belong.
Yeah.
And as you're scrolling, what you're finding is, I'm not that person. I'm not with that person. I don't have that. Here's a vacation spot that I can't afford. My back's hurting and I don't have that massager that like works everything
here's
out.
this guy sharing his faith and I don't have that faith. I mean, that's even the...
That too.
The University of California actually did a study about that, and the snowballing and compounding effect of seeing unhappiness or covetousness on social media. And they found that when maybe the weather gets bad and a person posts something because the weather is bad, they increase the negativity of the overall posts. And then when a person sees a negative post, they're then 3 times more likely to post a subsequent negative post. So it creates this snowball effect, right? And then Penn State did a study on self-esteem, and they said that people who use social media regularly have a 35% more chance to suffer extreme self-esteem issues.
Crazy.
I
believe it hands down.
Oh, me too.
I have never left a social media platform and not been depressed
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
And we've all had it. And we were talking about it for millennials or not. Like, I didn't grow up with it in my hands, right?
Sure, yeah.
Till later on. But even, I find myself, I'm scrolling for a while, and I feel the same way. Think about these children who are having suicidal ideation that can't get the phone off of their chest because their whole sociological structure is built into that forum. Their whole lives, their whole reputation, everything is built into that forum. That's incredibly alarming.
Yeah, I mean, there is a study where people who use social media regularly have much higher levels of anxiety and depression. The University of Humboldt in Berlin did a study that 35% of all people who use social media have extreme feelings of envy and envy spirals. There was a study by the American Journal of Preventative Medicine that said that let's see, of 19 to 32-year-olds who spend the most time on social media, 50% of them experience extreme loneliness and a lack of social belonging.
Can I share a fruit and testimony of Exodus 90, who's one of our sponsors? Exodus 90 is a great program for a fraternity of men to live out 90 days of austerity, prayer, and cold showers, no internet, no social media,
connectivity with other
actual community, fraternity. I had great experience, but I wanted to speak specifically about social media. When I erased Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and cut off means of communication if people can access me.
You should leave them on to follow us, but besides that.
But let me tell you, I felt this weight lift off of my chest and my head. And it was a real weight that lifted off of my heart.
My wife, Kelly, did the same thing. She says the best thing she's ever done is getting off social media because she's like, it's a waste of time. And the people and the things she sees on there does nothing uplifting.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things in the book was a correlation to someone's happiness and joy is community. And you kind of mentioned like this lack of, community and these relationships. And when I speak to people or my wife and I talk to couples and we just kind of like name all the struggles, we just throw it out there. We're very transparent and vulnerable. The thing that we get the most is people come to me and say, I'm glad I'm not alone. I thought I was the only one. Because we live in a culture that's just online or isolated. They close their garage door.
Yeah.
And couples don't share the fact that marriage is hard.
Yeah.
And priesthood is hard and raising kids is difficult. And, I'm broken and I have issues and I need counseling and I'm on antidepressants. Nobody, why are we not talking about the human struggle and the human answer?
Because there's all this envy out there and you don't want to present yourself as less than someone
vulnerability.
else.
You
vulnerability.
Vulnerability
Yes.
is the biggest thing I think that's under attack in our society when we harm the most vulnerable in our society. We don't mind the vulnerability that we have to give it to God, who wants that vulnerability to turn it into joy, right? I mean, this is what our culture looks at. If you look through the lens of vulnerability in our culture, you will find the bedrock of how God can change it, right? But vulnerability can't go out on its own. It has to be something that you do yourself with an act of your will and humility, right?
A big shout out goes to Teams of Our Lady. And from the first years of my priesthood until now, I've had a team that I've met with of multiple couples, married couples. And then I'm the spiritual director and we share highs and lows. We open up the scripture together. It's a wonderful program. I'm actually looking at kind of building a different program that can reach more families and have smaller groups to essentially do the same exact thing that you're sharing. And I can't tell you how many times we have experienced catharsis and great prayerful moments as a community of married couples and for myself as a priest, sharing our highs and lows and opening ourselves up to what truly does make us happy and joyful. One, that we are together, but Christ is drawing us together and he's given reason and purpose to the suffering that we're facing. And then the redemptive qualities of that draw us deeper into his love. And we need each other to be able to progress along the way of life. And we need to walk with each other and we need to create opportunities for that.
And that's not to say though, that once you find Christ, you'll never be unhappy again, because it's hard to cling to him in the storm.
Absolutely.
And like St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul, it's a journey, but the journey is unattainable, which is that full knowledge of God. So he's walking through darkness and he lives in darkness on this journey that he doesn't know where it's going to end. And it's crushing his soul. Mother Teresa had deep bouts of spiritual depression and doubt. I mean, these are saints, and they're experiencing the same thing that so many other people are out there.
Right.
It's a struggle, and it's hard to hold your hand up for the Lord when you're falling into the water like Peter in the storm. But it takes courage to do it, but that hand is always there to save you.
And Christ experienced desolation
Absolutely.
in the desert, in the garden,
On the cross.
on the cross. So he'd never ask us to do anything he didn't do.
Yeah.
On the
You
cross, when he shouted out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?"
Exactly.
I mean, he experienced all the loneliness and all the desolation that all humans have ever experienced in that moment. And
On epic proportions, because he was our creator.
and
we were
experienced it
killing
all at once. And he is like us in all things, even in that loneliness and desolation. So he understands you, and he can help lift you out of this unhappiness that so many of you are in.
And when we consider exactly what you're sharing, Paul, is the whole sense of Christ's invitation into greater communion with him. So yes, he had desolation, but if you're experiencing desolation, if you're prayerful about it, Christ is going to invite you into his desolation.
Right.
And when that happens, that is the occasion of joy. That is the occasion of happiness.
You know, sometimes one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard is that sometimes the only way that God can get into a heart is by breaking it. And sometimes the only way God can find a way into that deepest part of you is by finding a crack. And sometimes that's through a brokenheartedness.
Absolutely. I mean, you guys, I think in one of the shows, we're talking about sculptures. And in Jeremiah 18, I don't know if you guys broke that up. It says that, Jeremiah went to the potter's house. And the potter was there at the wheel making clay. And it said that one of the translations says that the clay was spoiled. And I think to myself, well, what's the potter going to do? Just throw it out and start over. And it says in the scripture, it says, no, the potter reworked it into something good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that. Like, that's the Father. He takes what's broken, he takes what's spoiled, and he just says, no. I'm going to rework you into something
Not
good.
get rid of it.
And that's hard. I mean, if you ever, done pottery,
it's terrible.
it's horrible. You beat it, you crush it, you start over. I'm horrible at it. Me too. So I stopped doing it. But the Father doesn't. He never stops reworking us into something beautiful. And that's the thing. I think one of the things that's lacking in our spiritual culture is a lack of grit. People give up too easy. And Jesus is with us through it all. I mean, what's greater consolation? What's greater happiness? An answer, or knowing that Jesus is with you?
Mm-hmm.
We are truly clay in the potter's hands, without a doubt. And thank God he is merciful with us, that he just doesn't throw us out.
Absolutely.
There's an image that I love as well, is broken glass, and stained glass windows. It's like, when we just focus on ourselves and we don't see ourselves in the big picture, we feel like a broken piece of glass. But when we are in the hands of the artist that is God, he places us in perfect line so that we fit a larger picture of salvation. So when the sun shines through it, it can be clearly seen. Mm-hmm. And these beautiful images, these metaphors, these analogies give us a sense of, I do feel broken. I do feel like I'm just a blob of nothingness. But no, in the hands of God, he can work us into something beautiful. Let's be patient and have a little bit of grit.
I love Psalm 34. The righteous cry out, the Lord hears, and he rescues them from their afflictions. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the troubles of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him from them all. It's really there for you. It's all there for you. And he understands, deeply. Our Lord understands the brokenness of everyone. Now, before we continue this conversation, why don't you tell everyone about our sponsors and how we are able to bring on awesome guests like Paul, and how these apps are some of the apps that can actually help them in this struggle?
Absolutely. We want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Exodus 90, as well as Hallow. Exodus 90 is a great program out there for all men considering taking the next step in their faith journey. With other brothers, they spend 90 days living austerely and praying and performing different acts of penance and austerity. Now, I've done this experience. Cold showers aren't too bad. And praying through Exodus can only give you a greater sense of an impetus to break through the chains of your own life with other brothers, finding greater freedom in the prayer life. We also want to recognize our sponsor, Hallow, a great application that has quickly become the #1 prayer app on the App Store. So be sure to check out Hallow, and there you'll find all these beautiful prayers that they've uploaded, from daily meditations to rosary to scripture, Lectio Divina, and so much more. These young people were inspired by the applications like Calm that are out there, and this helps people calm down and meditate and center their thoughts. Well, this is a great form of meditative prayer in the Catholic tradition that's being driven through an application. Hallow creates a wonderful sense of our Catholic heritage of prayer, and they have just about everything, and they're continuing to expand their product as time goes on. So be sure to check them out. And if you do, visit their website and use the promo Catholic Talk Show, and you'll get premium content for 30 days. And by using that, you'll be able to explore their full capacity of what they're offering. So be sure to check out Hallow, a great app for prayer.
Yeah, and talking about grit too, and you mentioned a really good thing culturally, how that's something that's very difficult, and I think that's why God says it's very difficult for a rich man to enter heaven, because you have all these things at your disposal to distract you and to comfort you, in a very short window. One of the things about grit, like that, I learned, I was watching a podcast, I can't remember who it was, but this guy was talking about how he met all these very wealthy people, and this one was a kid. And he was 27 years old. He had inherited over $1 billion from his father or something like that. And met him at a party. He's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I met this billionaire guy. I just started talking to him. He's like, dude, it's like I was talking to this like dead guy. Like, he's like, hey, yeah, I was in New York. I stayed with some friends over here. It's like, the guy had like no firm footing on anything in his life. He was just kind of floating around, staying here, going there, doing this, doing that. And he's like, I felt really sorry for him. And it's not having that grit is something to defeat you, that you overcome, kind of makes you feel alive, and it defines you, who you are in a lot of ways, and your character and how you approach things.
Yeah, it's like the young man who came up to Jesus and asked, what must we do to achieve eternal life? And and Jesus said, well, you do everything good, you keep the commandments. Go and sell everything that you have and follow me. And the young man went away sad.
That's the one to bold and underline. He went away sad.
Because he loved his possessions.
Yes. I met this NYPD beat cop years ago, and he was sharing with me just his own perspective. He said, when I was working, being in the poor neighborhood, I didn't see a lot of suicides. When I went to the rich neighborhood, I was responding to suicides all the time.
Absolutely.
And, it's an interesting take, because he lived it every single day. But I think there's something to be said about that.
It's one of the things I actually talk about because doing all this on happiness, it's like, no, there's got to be answers to it. I don't want to just talk about like, hey, we're all unhappy and we're looking forward. There's answers to happiness, I do believe. One of them is, and what we're talking about, is detachment. It's not so much, hey, I can't have money. It's being detached from the world, detached from things. These things don't define who I am, my identity. That's what we get stuck in. This is who I am. I'm attached to things. And Pope Benedict talked about that. He said the greatest poverty today is spiritual poverty.
Absolutely.
It's just this depth of spiritual poverty. And I remember having a meeting with Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez in Honduras, and he said that it's not the poor that need God the most. He said it's the wealthy, because the poor know that they need God, but the wealthy don't always think that they do. That we live in a world where we just have so many comforts and things that we can go through our day and not even think about God, right? I can get on my phone, I can order food. It's just possible. Yeah. Whereas if you're completely detached, say you're living in a third world and you're looking at a hole in the ground and you're saying, Lord, please let water come out of that hole today so I can drink. That's a whole different reliance. You see what I'm saying?
We have the luxury to be ungrateful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think one of the keys to happiness is gratitude, being grateful. So detachment, I think, and gratitude really play together. When you have detachment, you use your things for a better good, and you don't allow them, because necessarily they will use you unless you use them for the proper end.
Yes.
And we all fall into that stuff.
Sure.
I mean, we detach, I have fear that I can't take care of all my kids sometimes, or, I have fear that, I'm not loved by, a certain group or whatever, it's constantly there. You got to, and when I played baseball, there was this, I played shortstop. So lateral movement was a big deal. And you slide this way, slide that way on this machine. And every time I took my eyes off of this dot on the wall, which is supposed to center you, right, I would get unbalanced. And so it's always like looking at God, even though you kind of move this way or move that way, you still have that focus and you come back into balance, if you will, if you just keep your eyes focused.
That's like
Great
motion
analogy.
sickness,
Well, I think detachment is saying, God, you're in control. You're in charge of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's detachment. It's surrender. It's letting go and say, God, you're in control in the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like you're in control. This is what builds spiritual grit. I think this is why we go through desolation in times of prayer. Is just saying, Lord, there is no answer, but the greatest gift I have right now is just knowing you're with me right in this moment, your peace, your presence. That's happiness. That's true joy, is being able to take a deep breath and say, you know what, I faced today, but God's with me. God's in me. God lives inside of me. That's the greatest gift that we have more than anything else.
Indeed.
Absolutely. And then again, that practice of gratitude, once you have that detachment, you can then not be ordered towards possession, but you can be ordered towards gratitude and reception.
Yeah.
So when things come to you, you can take an accounting of them and know that they are not your end. You are not made to accumulate or to have. These things are all gifts and they're all passing through you. And that gratitude then continues to orient you from detachment, again, towards a gratitude towards God. And you won't always feel that need for more and comparison and lacking because you don't have enough. You're, taking a little time every day to really account for what you have and who it comes from and being grateful for it is one of the most important things people can do to find a real happiness in this hyper commercialized and competitive and envy filled society.
But
Now,
doing
if
that also takes detachment.
That's what I'm saying. That's ultimately where it has to be driven at.
Yeah.
So
From
if you're
detachment.
sitting there thinking, detachment, I do want to be happy. How do I get there? There's resources out there for you right now. Certainly check out Paul George's book, Rethink Happiness, Dare to Embrace God and Experience True Joy. Another book that I give to people that I'm giving direction to who are struggling as well, who need to get to detachment. It's one of the greatest books I've come across, and I hand them out for free. Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence, The Secret of Peace and Happiness, a book by Jean-Baptiste de Saint-Just. And it is a tremendous book. Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence, The Secret of Peace and Happiness. It's a short book. It's a book that's intended to pray with. So pray with it slowly. Let it be a daily devotional for you. Read it multiple times, and I promise you it will provide you that cultivating spirituality of detachment that is so necessary to what we're talking
also,
about.
Searching for and Maintaining Peace by
yes.
Father Jacques Philippe. It's
he's amazing.
Yeah, he's the deal.
Yeah.
Like he's the ninja. If you could have him on the show. Anyway, that's a great book to work with. And that kind of brings it into context, Father, is just developing this source of prayer and communication with the Lord. It really is what roots us in happiness. It's relationship. And we talk about the, lack of community and all these things that the Lord kind of centers all that, and it's a relationship. He's not a far off object. He is a person. He is real. He is alive. He wants to be active in our life. And Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, talks about that. He says, we're not deists. We don't believe that the Lord created and stepped away. He says, no, the Lord created and stepped in.
Yes.
Right? And the Lord wants to step into our life, walk with us. Is there anything greater in happiness to know that God's walking with me, right? In the midst of whatever I'm going through, that's joy, that's peace.
I have to share that in the experience, and I was actually sharing this last night in conversation, the experience of moving along the pathway of my priesthood, the more and more that I enter into a desire for more poverty. And St. Ignatius of Loyola would express, you never modify your vow of poverty unless you are going to make it more stricter. And the beauty of the Catholic Church is that it provides structures of celibacy, poverty, silence, these various vows.
These are all antidotes to what we experience in
but
this
like
world.
objectively speaking, like the world looks at that and you're like, you're crazy. You're crazy.
Yeah.
You're crazy.
It's the best.
It's the best. but no, like to think that, you know, you're going to take a vow of poverty in this search for happiness. You're going to take a vow of celibacy in this search for happiness. People in the world, there's a struggle for commitment, and there's concerns. I'll never forget my barber, Kwame. Big shout out to those boys at Fine Grooming Studio in Arlington, Jacksonville.
This is like a couple times you get
Yeah,
shout
I
outs.
love this. I love these
There's
guys.
some wisdom there.
I love these guys, but he said when he found out that I was a priest, because for a long time it was just we were talking basketball, we were talking sports or whatever, and then he found out that I was a priest, and then like the questions started going so he's like, celibacy, father, like you ain't gonna get no and he's just asking these questions and he said, Father, I don't know, man. I'd rather go vegan than go virgin. But it gave me a wonderful opportunity to start expressing this wisdom of, where do we find our happiness?
Right.
And these states of life that the church has lived out for so long in the person of Jesus Christ, in his celibacy, in his poverty, in all of these various realities.
And that's the thing is, Father, like we don't give up where God's not going to give back.
Yes.
Like when we give up, God's grace pours in. He gives back.
You're getting stuff out of your hands so they can put more in it.
Exactly. So if there's sin billowing up in your life, you can let go of it and be assured that God could fill that hole there, that gap.
Yeah.
If you are attached to things, you could be sure that you could let go of them, and God will replace it with something greater.
This one guy told me something. He's in one of my really dark times before my conversion. He's like, if you think about yourself all day long, you're sure to have a bad day.
Oh, 100%.
Like if you start thinking about other people, God starts thinking about you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just like, how does that work, man? If I just stop thinking about myself and think about other people, what about me?
Yeah.
And he's just like, you got to let go of that and get involved in what other people need. And I was just like, wow.
In 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your worries upon him because he cares for you. It's just that release and just trusting God. And all of the happiest people I've ever met live the most simple lives. Like I think of the Mercedarian Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament up in Cleveland. You cannot be around them without experiencing their joy. It is so happy. Mm-hmm. And they live so simply. And they're not lacking. They're not like, I think they have like one cell phone between all of them. And they're like, oh, mother, can I use the phone? Because we have to update. They don't have stuff and they don't care. They have so much joy,
So one of the things I talk about, and it's kind of that, and people who are listening, I've met poor people who are happy and unhappy. Mm-hmm. And I've met millionaires who are unhappy and happy. Mm. And I started thinking, what do the people who are happy on both ends of the spectrum? Because the studies on happiness say this: once you have basic water, food, and clothing, there is no inflection point on your happiness based on how much more you have. As a matter of fact, is the more you gain,
more money, more problems.
It plateaus for a while, and then there's problems on the back end. Okay, and so there's no like, hey, more, I'll be happy. That all the studies debunk that. So I looked at what are the common denominators between a poor person who's happy, in a sense poor, you know what I mean, and a wealthy person who's happy, and it's all this we're talking about. They can both have detachment. They can both have gratitude. They can both have community, right? They can both have a sense of prayer and solitude and quietness. They can both, have a sense of purpose and mission. And you look at all those things and common denominators, when we lean into that, that's when we begin to find happiness. No matter what scale we're on, no matter where you're at.
That is great data.
So one of the most joyful saints ever, St. John Bosco, and I know you have a particular devotion to him, he gave 6 tips for being happy, for leading a life of joy. And
this is a saint.
It's the St. John Bosco.
It's not a new concept we're talking about here. We've all been searching for this, right?
So he says, live for God alone, right? Give God the greatest possible glory and honor him with your whole soul. If you have a sin on your conscience, remove it as soon as possible are the means of good confession, and live for him fully. Bless you.
Thank you.
The second one is be a servant, never offend everyone, and above all, be willing to serve others. Be careful in your associations. Uh-oh.
You lay with the dogs, you wake up with the fleas,
Right.
man.
Dang, man, I got something going on there.
I think it's been you, man. You.
He says, spend carefully. If you do not want to be ruined, never spend more than you earned, which is living humbly, living simply. And then he says, be humble. Speak little of yourself and never praise yourself, even if you deserve it, because your opinion of others will eventually go away. And if you're seeking honor, you will own up. He who seeks only praise and honors is sure to have an empty head fed only by the wind. And then the last one is carry your cross. Carry your cross on your back and take it as this comes.
That's it.
Small or large, whether you're from friends or enemies, and whatever would it be made of.
That's it.
We're all future saints. We've been talking about this. We didn't even know.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord.
But John Bosco, I mean, that's a good example for holiness.
Yeah.
Is he
He's a really
like the
happy
human search engine? Like as we're sitting here,
Oh, he
he's
is.
just pulling up data.
He gets this like ding, and then he just starts going in here, and then Delacroix and I are normally like,
I have there's a lot of connections in byways, and something comes up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
the brilliant mind of Ryan.
And when
Shield.
did Bosco die? When did he live?
1890s?
Yeah, that was 19.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it was not too far back.
Yeah.
1888.
Yeah, I'm in Lafayette, Louisiana, and right outside of Lafayette is a school that St. Catherine Drexel founded in the early 1900s. She was someone who inherited at the time millions and millions of dollars.
She was the upper crust of Philadelphia society, just a heiress.
Yeah. Used it all she started the
of
first black university, Xavier, in New Orleans, schools, and just gave it all. And like, she was as happy as could be, you know. She found real purpose, mission, community, prayer. We don't always have to live in religious order, but we can have those pillars in our life, no matter what season we're in or what vocation we're in, to find happiness.
Because that's the important thing. It's like, what are the pillars, right? Because, you always go back to that pillar. It's kind of like that dot on that wall. It's like you get a little wonky, you go back to that dot. It's knowing that if I stay the course with these pillars in my life, if this becomes my sort of breeding ground of my life and my focus, that yes, I'm going to go up and down, but God will always take care of you.
If you've ever been on a boat and you've gotten seasickness, anybody who knows, like Howard, who's the good Gorton fisherman, is that you look at the horizon, right? You look at the horizon, that gives you a stabilization, a point of focus. And if Christ is always your horizon where the sun rises for you every day, that sickness and that disorientation that you experience in your life is not going to affect you. You're going to be able to have a point of focus that cures you of your disorientation.
So I think down to the fundamentals, and talking about detachment, talking about the importance of prayer. It's not having a lot, and analyzing. I love that data that you provided for us, Paul. In respect to the very, very wealthy, the very poor. There's unhappiness in both. So where do we find happiness? The more that we narrow in, community is essential. And you don't have to belong to a religious community. You don't have to take some of these vows. Maybe you do want to live a form of consecrated life. But finding ways that you can join a community, even if it's like a Bible study at your local parish, if it's a men's group, if it's a women's group, if it's a Knights of Columbus, CCW, CL, Communion and Liberation, if you're a young adult, a young kid out there, joining a youth group, joining a different program, sports, athletics, that are having a sense of fellowship, and you continue to go back to the baseball analogy, which I love, but being a part of a team, being a part of a common initiative, and especially if that initiative is prayer, if that initiative is communion with Christ and learning about our faith and growing closer together in vulnerability of our own difficulties and sins, that is a very powerful place of happiness, a very powerful place of joy.
Yeah, there was a study done on this. It was a non-religious study. And this guy found, I don't know if you guys heard this, he says, basically it comes down to this: we're the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. I mean, the sum of that, people shape us, they either sharpen us or dull us, and I've even had to learn the art of getting out of relationships that aren't healthy for me, friendships that aren't good for me. It doesn't mean I can't love people or reach out to them or be a missionary in that part of town or neighborhood or to that family, but my growth is dependent upon who I surround myself with.
Yeah, but then there's also the balance of God having people in your life for a reason that they might.
But you have to be able to be healthy enough in yourself to be able
Well,
to
and
spend
that's
spend
exactly
the
right.
most time with. So,
Gotcha.
so that's what the study. It's not who you spend the most
time with,
who kind of and that's what you say is find community. It could be in any way in your parish or whatnot.
And creating space, what we've been talking about, when I was like 19, 20 years old, I stepped away from the people I used to hang out with in my neighborhood because just the what we were doing occupation-wise was not good for me. And I remember walking away for a few months and not having anybody to spend time with. I was reading the scriptures, I was praying the rosary, I was watching movies with my grandparents on the Catholic faith and all that stuff.
Detox, man.
Yeah, it was detox. That's exactly what it was. And I remember this one particular day, I was feeling real lonely, and I drove up to the end of the corner and pulled over, hung out with some friends. Some things started happening, and lightning filled the sky, and it started to rain. And I looked, and I just felt like God was saying, like, Rich, I am the all-powerful God. I am not going to lead you to despair. Trust me and continue to walk with me. So I left that community, for good. Like I just stepped away from it. And I went courageously into the unknown. And then lo and behold, I meet Father Tedlow, who became my, best friend. He's 20 years older than me or whatever. Never could imagine of developing a friendship like that. Became my spiritual director, my mentor, and got me involved in the church 7 days a week. I mean, you have to walk away from certain relationships in order to get to the relationships that God is desiring to cultivate in your life.
It's detachment, what you said. But the other thing, too, is asking God to bring these people in your life and trusting that he'll do it because he will, because he wants the best for you.
Without a doubt.
Right? And so it's miraculous, right? How this whole series of events worked out in your life where you look back and you can only see the hand of God doing that. And me the same.
Yeah. And I would
how
say
we met each other too. I mean, how we met each other,
Yeah.
how we're meeting each other today, like all of this is very providential.
Yeah, and I would also say that for anyone out there struggling with unhappiness, that the most powerful thing that you can do is have hope. And hope is so intrinsically tied to the Catholic faith, and continue to have hope and trust.
And to remember that faith, hope, and love are gifts.
They are. And remember Romans 15:13, that may the God of hope fill you with all the joy and peace in believing. Now, there's a lot of different ways to find happiness, but how can people find your book?
Easy. Amazon, just search Rethink Happiness. If you search Paul George, you could get me or a basketball player.
PG-13.
I search Paul George all the time, actually.
Yeah, I'll make sure I
look different, so you should be able to figure
You're
it
about
out.
You're about the same height, actually.
Yeah, I don't see that kind of stuff. And I was
taller.
just, you told me this was Paul George, and I'm like,
Yeah,
okay.
let's have him on the show.
No, I'll make sure I put a link on this so everyone can get this book and take a look at this, Rethinking Happiness.
Yeah, we'll put links to the other books too as well. I mean, I think this is
It's an important topic that doesn't get talked about.
There's a
enough.
lot of people, including us, right? All of us struggle and with anxiety, stress, pressures, suffering, fears, the unknown. But God leads us to these realities so that we may break through them with the gifts of faith, hope, and love. And we must remember that hope, my brothers and sisters, hope is something secured in heaven. It's not a blind hope. It's something more than the hope that we root in this world. It's a hope that's entrusted with the promise from Christ Jesus himself, who has gone before us in all things. So let us take courage and let us take hope from Christ, and in faith walk in him, because he's filling us with love every day if we open ourselves to it.
Great.
Yeah.
See you guys next week.
Great having you on.
Thanks, Paul.
Absolutely.
Not the basketball player, Paul.